Hmm. Girl, they better print some money. Meeting new people is perhaps an occurrence never really on your terms, but meeting someone and wanting them to meet you are two distinct things. And sometimes, while you're still busy deciding, they decide for you. They come into your life and take something on their terms, something they were never supposed to be able to take, or in that way, to begin with. Thus, your shared encounter is reduced to a moment of control, and it's weaponizing. And even if, in your processing of it all, somewhere down the line, you should find yourself wanting to give them the benefit of the doubt, you'll never get back what you were robbed of. How you come into this world is how you learn what it takes to move through it, and how you value that journey. Privilege alone does not necessarily frame anyone's structural encounter with hardship, but institutionally and systemically, it does. Some of us try and sit with the overflow of responsibilities. Some of us sit with it by a pool.
ก็ถ้าในนิยายสลับร่างกันเพราะตกน้ำอะเรามาโดดน้ำกัน
Whatever trauma needs to be processed, you have to spend your time, they get to pass it. But you, beautiful queer child, you are a survivor, and so much more. Even if you must shoulder the oppressions of capitalism and the sharp weight it cracks down on your spine, despite what they may claim, your being is not anyone's capital. Just because you're treated as a tool to dig your early grave and sell you the coffin, does not ever mean you are at fault for what exploitation happens to you. In the symmetry that is existence, however, somehow you are still responsible for what you make of your life. While your fate is inextricably tied to others, your agency should be yours, and yours alone, no matter what this world might try to teach or force you. Control isn't supposed to be about what you take from others, but rather what you give yourself, which means, above all, in this demanding world, you must give yourself empathy. Faces without words will always surround you. They will be teachers, co-workers, family, friends, perhaps even lovers. You must decide which of them mean to face their deeds, and which of them would easily do it again. Which of them are hurting too, and which of them try to put that on you. It isn't easy, and it isn't simple. Intent is spoken as it is shown, and all that moving sound can be overwhelming. If you listen to yourself, you can cut through the noise eventually, and recognize who is worth your time. Friend from foe, lover from rival. Listening begs forgiveness, and forgiving shouldn't beg at all. But while forgiving can resolve tension between you, can forgiving absolve what happened to you? Does it absolve the persons involved? What rests in the present to warrant grace? Can you truly leave it in the past if it followed your entire future? And should you be able to? What are you giving for forgiveness? What is the price and who is paying? And what happens if harm, even the same shape of harm, happens again? What then? These are the questions of Queendom. Questions the show embodies, but ultimately itself fails to reflect on, beyond what it sees and shows in the mirror.
Wow, that was so powerful.
Now, before I indulge in any critical analysis or inefficacies of messaging, etc., I have to make it perfectly clear I have love for this show. In fact, it settled its place in my current top 3 thaigl. It has been long since I sat down every week, truly excited and ready to watch. No aspirin on standby or anything. And there are many shows to watch right now, but so few that speak to me personally, and even less to try to say something. Queendom, on that end, is truly a show that tries, at least initially. It has charm, it has heart. Its bright, steady color grading and coding, bubbly aesthetic, and relatively safe yet effective cinematography draw a clear feeling of the subjects and their immediate surroundings, and pull us into them. The editing is witty, with fun graphical elements here and there, and it can even be moving in the way it places such importance on how the characters emotionally experience their inhabited space. The accompanied poppy soundtrack and overall sound design interject and guide where needed, keeping balance in the feel of the scene. Dialogue is lighthearted, at times actually funny, and mostly inoffensive, except for the unnecessary BAVE, at least in English subtitles. Though meant to comically frame defined differences in the lead's generations by use of language, these few lines use black and black queer culture as an appropriative punchline. This aside, the show's overall tone is a tone that feels light, playful, and decisively comforting, which ironically also turns out to be to the show's detriment, but we'll get to that. It takes incredible skill and discipline to be a good actor, and even more so to be consistent in your portrayal, and triply so to be an actor cast in a lead GL role for the first time, where a core part of the show consists of you having to act as the opposite character and navigate the subsequent emotional and physical intimacy of understanding your subject material. Praise is so very deserved for both Arhung and Pam in this regard. As Ray and Print, they both do a fantastic job embodying, well, each other, as well as their own character. Understanding the story's enveloped psychology behind being in someone else's body is one thing, but acting out an introductory characterization that evolves, not just through standard plot progression, but also due to a post-body switch, is altogether a rare challenge. Going as far as to incorporate visible muscle memory where appropriate, and playing with body language, in the traits, mannerisms, and tone of voice they exhibit, develop, and claim over time.
เรากลับมาเจอกันแรกๆเหมือนกันเนาะพินว่าถ้าจะทำมินเนอร์ขึ้นไปน่าจะเข้ากันได้ดี
On that note, the plot device of the body swap itself is also handled with attentive direction, both aesthetically as well as how consistently it is portrayed in the narrative. The more you look for it, the more you see the motif of mirroring reflected in near every scene, which is a joy to follow. Keeping directive track of visuals and dialogue is no small feat, yet Queendom manages it successfully, without it feeling obnoxious or overdone. Pam and Arhung also just put in the work to convey the deepening range of emotions. I would argue that, as the show goes on, we lose a lot of the emotional weight. And this is unfortunately in part due to not just rushed conflicts, but also due to a lacking perceivable insight into their inner world, or rather, the inner growth that gets them to resolving their issues, be it in dialogue or otherwise. To be fair, there isn't much time to devote to their individual development, because the show attempts to equally balance screen time for both Ray and Prin's journey, for the most part. And so, scenes and plot lines of dispute and high drama cannot be explored in their full emotional weight and point, respective to each individual character. I was personally also not particularly moved by the more emotional scenes, with the exception of their first kiss and Prin's tearful grieving of her father at the beach. But I wouldn't say this is due to either of their acting capabilities, but rather the increasingly inconsequential writing, choppy pacing, and, where applicable, impartial, yet really partial, storyline development and focus. As for secondary characters, Lin and Preo are definitely my favorite GL side couple of all time, and that's not peculiar. Though there are a handful of GLs out there with 30-something leads, we still don't have much post-20s queer/women love women representation where these leads aren't either groomers or abusers. And both leads play 30-somethings, figuring out their relationship and work-life balance to boot. Or just not cops. Though I will forever be frustrated with the sheer lack of context we got from Mai and Fawn's past. Like what exactly the sequence of events was that led to Fawn getting fired after kissing Mai, and the underlying power dynamic there.
แล้วก็ใส่เหมือนเดิมด้วยทำไมพี่จะหักคะแนนฝนแล้วไงฮะอย่าลืมนะว่าพี่ไม่ได้เป็นเจ้านายฝนแล้วอะ
Wait a damn minute.
Also, while Lin does great with the material she's given, there isn't enough context of characterization to explain, in particular, Mai's development, and more could have been done to lay out her change or growth in reasoning, and at times lack thereof. Fawn, on the other hand, was clearly in love with Mai from the start, but we failed to be informed as to how she truly felt about how Mai treated her after their first kiss, and more importantly, what her process was to still hold on to her feelings even though they weren't visibly being reciprocated. It seems she has a deeply empathetic nature, matching Print. Their romance is, though complicated and messy in its own right, quite gripping, and some of my favorite, kinda cliche but heartwarming rom-com storytelling yet. And I have paced myself in only talking about the essentials of their relationship in this video, for sheer compassion of not spending even more of your time. But I must admit, because we haven't much background to work with, their respective personalities, interactions, and story development can't always be understood to full capacity. That said, Lin and Preo deliver a stellar, captivating, spiced yet soft performance. Chemistry aside, which felt strikingly organic, they have a knack for believably balancing quirky comedy with serious and mature relationship topics, appropriate for Mai and Fawn's stages in life. Their performance is still somehow grounded in a sense of reality, so much so that I find myself both charmed and worried about the prospect of dating in my 30s, if this is any indication of the level of communication we still gotta deal with at that age.
คนเจ้าระเบียบอย่างพี่ถ้าเกิดต้องเห็นฝนทำน้ำหกเลอะโต๊ะทุกวันอย่างเงี้ยพี่จะทนได้เหรอ
Wow, that is so powerful.
Besides Mai and Fawn's separate storyline, their relationships and actual scenes with Ray and Print are some of the best parts of the series, showcasing a sense of care that goes far beyond the scope of simply being a manager. The fluidity of this bond ebbs in a most precious way, creating a microcosm of queer family, a support system that isn't built on a basis of impersonal hierarchy, beyond financial and work dynamic of course, but rather on a base of need and understanding, and at times even thoroughly mutual understanding at that. That element of community is also most needed, as though Mai and Fawn seem to have somewhat of a social life before and outside of their relationship, Ray and Print don't really have on-screen friends other than co-workers, immediate family, and or each other. Mai and Fawn do not demand a completely cold, strictly professional bond with their clients, even if Mai in particular does draw a far sharper boundary in her work ethic, where familiarity and vulnerability are concerned. It would seem, though they go about expressing it in vastly different ways, that Mai and Fawn are similarly aware of the lack and or need of support both Ray and Print are generally dealing with. So, they take on a semi-parental role. Sure, sometimes they wind up treating Ray and Print like kids in the process, especially Mai, but it mostly comes from a place of protection, not mere infantilization. Besides which, to Mai and Fawn, Ray and Print still kind of are kids, young adults that deserve to be shielded in an industry and world ever willing to exploit them. And Lin and Preo understand the deep intricacies of all this, how it pertains to their characters, and how they can breathe life into these attributions. Their on-screen interactions with each other, as well as with Hung and Pam, feel altogether genuine, like the bond is really there. The performance is not only convincing, it is connected. These are not actors acting alongside each other, these are actors in conversation. The remaining relationship, that of Print's brother and Ray's friend, is fine, I suppose. I won't lie. I was annoyed with how much runtime their subplot took. As some of you may know, I don't too much care for the stories of cis men in GL, gay or otherwise, and there is no exception here. But I will grant some grace, as Frank and Urs how do you pronounce that? As Frank and Ur's side plot, overall, did not take up too much time, was mostly a plot point to further Print's growth, and in a smaller way, Ray's too, and established more conversation around the theme of family, its dynamics, etc. between the both of them. In general, the entire rest of the cast did a fine job, everyone playing their part with conviction. Particularly, I want to give a shout out to Ali Black Cobra, playing the part of a trans deity, or as the show calls her, the mysterious person. Actually, it is a little unclear to me whether she's supposed to be a god or a witch or something else, but nevertheless, I love that Queendom centers a trans character as integral to the story, small as the role relatively may be, and her campy performance is most welcome, befitting of the sheer drama of her powers on display. Also, the poetic metaphor of a trans woman casting a body switch spell to bring two other women closer together and bond their understanding of each other, yeah, it's genuinely beautiful. Sure, the show squanders the occasion to truly deeply explore feminist rhetoric on gender and universalities of femininity, but the narrative possibility is there, and contemplations on shared womanhood are, at the very least, implied. Furthermore, she may have completely switched up Ray and Print's lives, but she's not actually a villain, nor is she coded as one, which I appreciate. Overall, on the part of production, performance, and picture, the show tries to balance mature themes, magical realism, young and older love, and is conscious of how it chooses to do so. in its visual voice. As for what that voice is actually trying to say with everything else, well, you know that joke about how, if God exists, why do we still have bills? Queendom's universe is a rather lighthearted spin on that.
เจ้าแม่งูเขียวบอกเขาว่าถ้ามีค่าครูเพิ่มกันคนละ15,000แล้วก็อาจจะไม่ต้องใช้รูปในการทำพิธีก็ได้
The body switch and its surrounding mystical spectacle shocks everyone in the know, of course, but beyond initial confusion, no one seems all too fazed about the fact such magic even really exists. In fact, they accept it with a certain relative rapidity, or a dramatized, possibly culturally appropriate sense of familiarity with the general concept, which provides the story itself open space to engage with both general queer themes as well as world building in a way that prioritizes, at least for the lead characters, a casualty to the fantastic. On paper, this casual fantasy, in turn, lends itself to an incredible capacity to queerdom, highlighting the way characters engage with each other, themselves, and the world they are in, and how the world interacts with them. A kind of blend betwixt queer fantasy and futurism, if you will. Queendom's world is very queer, that is to say, largely centered around queer people, even if the actual word, or any of the other letters for that matter, isn't literally uttered once.
I never said LGBT last night.
And queerphobia seems, in the grand scheme of it, largely not of lasting impact on this story and world, though its presence is certainly felt in, for example, the initial anxiety around how Ray's mother would respond to Print and Ray's relationship, or of course the stalker side plot. Even still, these issues are either proven a non-issue or resolved with more queer intervention.
หนีมาดูตัวคิดว่าตัวเองเป็นนางเอกละครหรือไงฮะ
มึงใครหรอลานงูลีดูลากมูสด
All y'all gay. Whatever. Everybody gay. Now, in their own way.
But Queendom's visual queerness and magical realism seem to trade off intentionally and, most importantly, critically engaging with some of the very issues both its and real-life queer people face, structurally as well as institutionally. And thus, while the characters are queer, the show's baseline politics, in practice, at times falter to radically implement actually queer values.
I never said LGBT.
The Glitter Girl incident, the conflict that started it all. Even though the show does gradually diminish its weight, the incident is fundamental to the story, paramount. Ray's mom sabotages the competition by abusing, or I guess just using, her connections so that Ray wins. Naturally, this is devastating for Print, which the show makes a point of through flashbacks. But from the start of introducing this history, the show downplays the actual ongoing impact it has on Print's life and future and the trauma this truly caused her, beyond what we see emotionally, briefly. Because it wasn't just some talent show, the prize wasn't just a sash or a trophy, it was an actual record deal.
Petrichor วันนี้ก็จะได้อยู่ห้องใหญ่ๆได้นอนเตียงนุ่มๆได้แช่อ่างจากุซซี่ฟินๆแล้วที่สำคัญอ่ะก็จะสามารถส่งเงินให้ที่บ้านได้สบายๆ
And when I say downplay, I don't mean the show doesn't mention it, clearly. It talks about it, more in depth, in this very scene, but only this scene. Instead of using this moment to have Ray reflect on their current difference in positionality as a result of this history because of her, the writing has her turn it into the furthering of an acting lesson, with Ray directing Print into channeling said trauma to access her emotions better in her work. Another unintentional, full circle point on how Print's trauma is directly tied to her livelihood. Ray seems to revel somewhat in Print depending on her for help. Another unintentional full circle point on how differently they exercise control, without even getting into how Ray treats Print like lesser after she moves into her apartment part-time. This is their first real deep conversation, mid-body switch. Ray acknowledges Print lost an incredible opportunity, even going as far as to name all of what she's lost, but going no further into trying to take accountability in some tangible way. Print is visibly upset and can express so briefly in her facial expression, but her character early on shows that she prioritizes forgiveness, grace, and learning to relativize the struggles and pain of those who've harmed you. So she looks at Ray, teary-eyed, and doesn't respond. Her empathy is always hard at work, seemingly at the cost of her sense of justice for herself, and beyond print, the available justice of the world itself. Granted, this is only the first time the Glitter Girl incident comes up in dialogue. The second time, they're sat at the beach after finding Prince's dog.
Wow, that was so powerful.
And Prince shares some childhood memories. She talks about how she promised her father she'd win the competition, and how she couldn't fulfill that promise. We see Ray struggle with processing that information, feeling guilty once more, and this time vocalizing it more clearly. It is worth noting this narrative approach to Ray understanding Prince's struggle better through clearly empathizing with the part of Prince's inability to make her father proud, so to speak, is befitting writing on behalf of Ray's characterization, as the sentiment is, in a general sense, relatable for her, having her own complex relationship with her parents' approval. This is really the most tangible conversation we get to see Ray and Print have around what happened to Print, what she experienced, what she lost. Past this moment, the writing seems set on using their former conflict as a means to romantically connect them and bring them closer, which makes sense. However, the show goes about this with a method of comparison. We do come back to the topic once more, but from Ray's angle, in favor of exploring Ray's side of it. In the abandoned school where they revisit their past, she gives a monologue about the burden of being bullied after the blackmailing, and bullied about being a nepo baby at that, and how it alienated her from the rest of the class. Ray shares how hard this was on her, and how much she hated her mother for it. And Print, with her big heart, apologizes to her, recalling how she didn't stick up for Ray back when kids were talking behind her back, which is, in how the scene is framed emotionally, a choice on the show's part to balance out the portrayal of experienced consequence yet again, by comparing the trauma of the victim and the perpetrator, disregarding difference of present privilege in the process. Years of context around all that happened and how they need to rectify and reflect on it for the sake of their new professional and intimate bond alike boil down to 2 or 3 short talks, half of which engaged in relativity. And then the whole thing is basically resolved, as we fully move on to the segue of their budding love story. Because ultimately, the show has to create a romance between 2 characters who do not suffer the same, and have a history steeped in capitalist violence, one towards the other. And yes, I would argue that losing your chance at a record deal and entry to the entertainment industry with the gain of financial security, etc., due to bribing is capitalist violence. Class discrimination at that. The show doesn't invest in defining the true harm at play here, but it is still obvious to us as viewers. Commentary is, in large part, what we must make ourselves, as the show puts all its efforts into setting Ray and Prince's experiences side by side, focusing on how it benefits the empathizing with Ray's struggles and maintaining of Prince's empathy for the progression of their love story. The conflict-based origin of their story provides a challenging task for any writer or director when it comes to implementing connection, let alone romance, certainly. But it's a task that bears a thorough insertion of principled ideas on equity to honestly, ethically, romantically pull off.
เลิกหน่อยได้แล้วไหนยิ้ม 5,000 ให้ดูหน่อย
It's getting weird. But I still need to get this watch.
Of course, Ray was not directly responsible for the bribing, and being conditioned by her abusive mother into compliance, she had to accept the situation, as she was too afraid to assert herself. One could argue that since she also faces psychological harm from her mother, as well as harm in the form of neglect from her father, even if she is part of that ecosystem of upper-class privilege by proxy, things are not so clear-cut. And while I certainly think it's very true, Ray deserves empathy for all she's been through with her parents, more empathy even than the show gives her, the fact of the matter is, now that Ray and Print are both adults, accountability must be taken seriously more than previously possible. For both of them have since become fully conscious of what exactly happened, the significant impact it had on Print's life, and the positional power structures between them that made it so possible, an imbalance which, mind you, still persists to this day. Well, actually, are they fully conscious? Is Print truly aware of her survivalist conditioning? More importantly, is Ray truly aware of her class privilege? How does the story, the writing, show us that she's become aware, when even in scenes where the past is addressed, her apology barely details reflection on her part in it? The corruption of how her privilege was exercised does not mention the overarching structures of power Print was subjugated to in Ray's benefit, and leaves out the present reality of what must be done, or what she would like to do in order to take proper accountability towards Print. Take a scenario in episode 2, for example, where Rey feels conflicted and guilty about her obligatory passivity and the disappointing of Prince's sister at the school's disciplinary meeting. This scene sets up a possible point of reflection for Rey. Rey, however, solely comments on the hardship of Prince's sense of responsibility concerning her family and her sisterly role, not on the class's structures perpetuating this hardship, the oppressive social rules and dynamics holding that meeting. Or, more simply put, Rey does not ask why Prince is always the one to apologize. She is aware what's happening is unjust, but we have no way to know how she interprets the systemic nature of this injustice.
แล้วเธอจะรับผิดชอบยังไง
พี่นิวขอโทษแทนน้องด้วยนะคะ
So the plaintiff loses, gets nothing. Ms. Howard, what are you thinking?
She lied, and I should have known better when I seen her hair.
Ms. Reese?
And maybe she doesn't ask because she does know, at least subconsciously. She is on some level aware of classism and how it pertains to Prince specifically, but it doesn't really outwardly show even in how she herself is experiencing it as Prince. This missed opportunity of reflexivity, and more specifically through the placement of Prince's family as a means to understanding Prince's positionality better, is made a further evident pattern in their first fight, where Rey comments snidely that Prince's taking of responsibility feels suffocating to her family. She ultimately apologizes, and while her apology demonstrates she does see both the emotional burden of protection Prince carries for her mother in the spirit of grieving the shared loss of her father, and the consequent guardianship Prince feels compelled to uphold as the oldest child, Rey does not insinuate she comprehends the burden of status, in how Prince's sense of responsibility and obligation is also tied to her and her family's interconnected livelihood and financial stability, which is relevant to the context of Rey and Prince's very history, considering Prince is where she is today also because of losing that competition, whereas Rey would still have been rich either way. So we are left to guess as to how much Rey truly sees why Prince works so hard. Of course, I get it may be too much to ask of an incredibly wealthy character to gain class consciousness overnight. I suppose I wish the body switch had narratively provided more growth for Rey's understanding of Prince in relation to her own influence in Prince's life. Perhaps because they now both have acting jobs in the same production and get to share fame as co-stars, Rey doesn't much stop to think about how different the journey was to getting there for each of them. It's conflicting because she does know of Prince's dreams, but she doesn't have many realizations about all it took to have those dreams realized. Maybe it's just me, but if I were in Rey's position, I would rack my brain to try and think of ways to, no matter how many years it's been, still take accountability for stealing my not really rival turned partner's chance at those dreams. Rey never properly apologizes, and she really wants to be seen in her pain. But how much does she see Prince in hers?
ได้เลยค่ะเดี๋ยวไปเอาให้ค่ะอ๋อหมายถึงเดี๋ยวพินไปเอาให้ค่ะแกนั่นแหละไปเอาดิ
I don't know nothing about that lifestyle. Whatever y'all got going on.
Perhaps Prince herself doesn't yet fully have a formed opinion on who and what systems exactly are at fault for her struggle, hard work, and exploitation. To sit and reflect on the myriad of ways the current reality of her career ties back to the Glitter Girl incident, and what claim she has to some form of reparations for it, takes, well, time. Time she kinda cannot afford. She has a lot going on after all, and at a young age, plus she's not the type to linger on the past anyways. Of course, she hates being so tired, but what are you gonna do?
Oh, Lord have mercy. Today drained me.
She values financial stability, and capitalism, essentially, is a means to achieve that for her, for better or for worse. So, like most of us, she buckles down. Besides, everyone's comprehension of general class theory is different, formed by education, culture, background, experience, and so much more. Not only that, but connected to their politics as well. It's completely valid she just may not have such a leftist take on what happened to her on a sociological level, favoring casting blame onto the individuals involved, and see their harmful actions as untethered from the deep-rooted institutions that allow them to harm thusly. She's an immensely empathetic, not easily defeated person, willingly sharing and giving up her joy, energy, time, and even opportunities to benefit and support others. particularly her loved ones. She attends meetings with her mother when her sister gets in trouble to defuse the situation and apologize on everyone's behalf. She is strongly protective over her brother and doesn't always seem to trust his personal life choices, even if they don't technically concern her at all. She's working on a house for the whole family to live in. Meanwhile, the family never even expressed wanting to move and live there. She is deeply caring, but her empathy lacks boundary for others, but mainly for herself too. She goes beyond her means, expects little to nothing in return, and thanks the universe for the chance at the end of the day. Even when she is literally partially blacklisted in the industry by Ray's mother and subsequently loses a huge acting gig, she picks herself up by her bootstraps and bravely, seemingly undeterredly, continues looking for work.
จะไปเจอกันที่ทางช้าง
ครับ
Ariana, what are you doing here? Your mom don't look like her. They're just tight. She's supposed to wear them straight. And she has her...
She made her bob.
Prince's sense of gratitude and humility is admirable, certainly, but equally vital to the glamorizing of the story. On behalf of willful writing, she settles for equality over equity, where her own plight is concerned, so that the story also doesn't have to deal with delving into the contextual ramifications of the conflict it presents, or through her character. None of Prince's characterization is automatically bad writing. Far from it. It becomes complicated, though, when the show has its own share of something to say about the issues Prince faces, yet simultaneously tries to smoothen out the rough, heavy edges, to streamline how she processes said events. You end up with material that isn't direct in its voice on its own subject matter, and thus you must draw your conclusions on the narrative stance from all the places it doesn't set foot in, or barely dips its toes. While Print may not be fully aware of it, we, as the audience, can deduce her internalized anxiety around the need for stability isn't just a symptom of the trauma of losing her father, but also the trauma of consequent pressure to take on the role of a secondary provider for her family, emotionally too. Not that her mother doesn't have her own place or business even, but Prince seems set on the idea of keeping the family together at all costs, because of the shared loss of her father already causing a tear, and she has taken it upon herself to work towards affording and building them a home to do so. Her investments are emotional, as she is emotionally invested in her plans. The building of that house symbolizes coping with grief and the divide of her family, due to her career also being in a different city. Her need of control over her life in this subcontext is directly linked to her survival. It all comes back to survival, at the very least emotional survival. We as the audience expect this series to make a point of this overarching theme, because beyond how survival already naturally intersects with queer identity in and of itself, Prince's survival is tied to her empathy, which is inherently attached to the progression of the plot.
โหยบทนี้นะถ้าคุณพี่ดาราอย่างเลไปแคสอะยังไงก็ผ่าน
But wow, what a moment I will never forget. A moment that is most pleasing to me in my career.
It seems then the story has its own fair share of internalizations. While displaying some of the emotional gravity of what happened for Print, the show ultimately favors exploring Ray and Print's power dynamic beyond their previous history, instead of dissecting their past and present dynamic as part of it, which is paradoxical, and thus the show winds up not really exploring power dynamics at all.
เลยรู้สึกแย่ที่ยังมีงานทำอยู่คนเดียวทั้งที่บทนี้พิมเป็นคนแคสผ่าน
We were all so happy that day. It's actually hard to even imagine how terrible things would soon become.
Though Ray may have gone in circles with her growing more conscious about her own privilege, by the end of their body switch, she does seem to at least have come around on noticing how hard Print works. When asked what piece of jewelry Ray, as Print, would compare Print to at a joint brand event, she answers with a diamond. She remarks on how, to loosely quote, no one ever realizes the pressure a diamond goes through to turn into a priceless work of art. There is a lot to this answer, but the primary points that stand out are these.
Mm-hmm. 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 Now that's what I'm talking about.
This answer right here is the epitome of Ray's development in understanding Print. It makes sense then that the body switch back to themselves happens right after. Ray's accumulative response conveys everything I've been yapping about for the past how many minutes, that Ray truly sees Print. However, maybe it's just me, but because we still have not seen any attempt from Ray at reparations, a way to take accountability towards Print beyond words, and even that's debatable, and pointedly directly with her mother on Print's behalf, I do not feel this moment is earned. It falls flat because we rushed conflict resolutions to get here, and now that we are here, we're left with bright eyes and heavy speeches between two people who are as much falling in love as they are stuck in unhad conversations. Much like the act of selling a diamond, there is rich dialogue here, but dried blood kept quiet in between its lines. And it turns out that really is a gem of a description, as just when I was starting to feel like I was gaslighting myself into looking too deeply into all of this, Ray says this.
ตลกดีเนาะที่เราเคยคิดว่าชีวิตของอีกคนดีกว่าแต่ลืมไปเลยว่าอีกฝ่ายต้องเจออะไรมาบ้าง
Underlying and yet again clarifying what the narrative is consistently trying to tell us to accept, that Ray and Prince's hardships can essentially be compared or on an equal level, when, at least in my communist opinion, they cannot. Ray suffered an abusive mother, but systemically and materially she did have it better. And how? And since for Print, the Glitter Girl incident was specifically about obtaining certain privilege of a chance at fame, stage, wealth, and opportunity, it is not the same. There is no comparing the struggles of the rich and the not rich, whether they are both queer or women or hardworking or all three. Minimizing their differences is rather insulting. Print had every right to be oblivious about Ray's hardships. One faced class discrimination at the hands of the other. Equating their struggle is a disservice to both of them, but in mind of class solidarity, especially to Print, and beyond her, the story's own heartfelt musings on practicing forgiveness and queer love. And you know what? It didn't need to be this complicated. All it takes is one honest conversation, at least one, without comparison, without equating trauma, without diminishing positionality. But since we don't get to see that, Ray and Prince's love feels compensatory at times. Their actions and unrelated words, etc., compensating for the script-centrist approach to the central themes. Ironically, Prince's response, who answered first by the way, also being a diamond, audibly and subtextually reaffirms her internal desire for and coveting of material stability and success, the diamond itself being a universal marker of wealth. On a deeper level, it contextualizes how Print views Ray in her deep respect for Ray, a respect that is never unattached from Ray's social status. Though of course, Print does not love Ray merely for the privilege she wears, her adoration is also bound in admiration, even material admiration. Print's answer here shows exactly how aware she is of Ray's stature, the glow of accomplishment that surrounds her, and how she continues to feel, in some way, that she isn't in the same place. Though they have residual unspoken conflicts experienced as each other to work through at that moment, the switch back into their own bodies occurs after this conversation. Ray was the one to express them understanding each other better now, so there's an underlying emphasis on Ray also having learned the lesson, at least in the opinion of the mysterious person, who clearly agrees with how they went about learning this lesson. Yet, we learned the wrong one. If Print had kindly asked for more accountability or for Ray to not pretend their story is the same, who knows if we would have gotten here. And you know, maybe it is enough for her. Print never seemed to take offense to how they reflected on Glitter Girl. But in the spirit of media carrying the responsibility of message, no matter how intentional, I don't think it's enough for us. Ray and Prince's trauma alike deserve to be given proper discourse, not fleshed out with bare-bones, flesh-based metaphors lumped together.
ใกล้ถึงเวลาแล้วเตรียมสแตนบายได้เลยครับคุณพรินซ์
It's giving he, she, we, they.
Prince's loss and experience of harm remains foundational to the story at every level, yet reparations are wholly missing from its development. Now, you may be saying to yourself, reparations this, reparations that. Girl, isn't Ray's mother responsible for all this mess in the first place? And girl, what would these reparations even look like? Well, first of all,
She's not a girl. It's Miss
Swooner.
But I agree. You would be right. Ray's mother is directly responsible. However, responsibility does also lie with Ray, since even though she didn't commit the crime, she still has blood on her hands. Privilege doesn't care about how it is maintained, it only cares about being maintained. As for reparations, since the show gives no answers as to how Ray might possibly go about taking some of this responsibility better, I thought up some rapid examples. Besides this, the story also provides an onslaught of writing chances for Ray to grow in her understanding of Print and Print's trauma. After all, they're literally in each other's bodies for more than half the story. There are countless ways too to go about this that sincerely utilize the body as a true storytelling device to this end. And because I want to be able to embody what I say, here's some more examples. I'm aware some of these examples are simply asking too much. Ray's emotional awareness and personal growth is also in large part marred by her sense of responsibility towards her mother, which we'll get into more in a bit. On this point, there are times and ways the show does use the body switch plot device to its full advantage. On a set of a shared interview, Print, as Ray, has a moment of relapsing into anger after inadvertently gaining confirmation from Ray's mother about her suspicions on the nature of what happened that fateful day. Ray's mother demands Print, as Ray, perform a special song at the end, and after singing the very song Ray robbed her of her win with, the exact tune she could not back then sing properly because of the pressure of seeing her mother in the audience, Print throws it in Ray's face, knowing how hurt Ray will feel. An eye for an eye. In an effective irony, Ray sees someone else, as her, rob her of the opportunity of closure, singing the song perfectly as she always wanted to, and simultaneously making her mother proud. It is a clever, to-the-point bit of storytelling, laying bare the difficult and deep web of emotional layers beyond the surface of their differences. Unfortunately, these kind of plot points that make full use of the body swap to relay their internal growth aren't as common as they may seem. Perhaps the most important, unexplored example of all would be Ray noticing and processing how her own mother treats her in Print's body, but it is lost due to the reoccurring theme of filial piety, the loyalty Ray, and even Print eventually, feels towards her mother. And the show goes to great lengths to make clear how much it values that family value. The way Ray as Print has to damn near grovel to get a sliver of her attention, or pull out all the emotional stops to try and evoke a reaction from her mother, who is literally ignoring Print's normal, polite attempts at conversation, or responding with nothing more than an air of distaste, insult, or meager pleasantry. It's kind of upsetting to witness, but of course, the series treats it as comedy. Ray, as Print, trying desperately to connect to the woman who ruined her life, that is, Ray's girlfriend's life, is supposed to be funny.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it makes sense for Ray to be used to approaching her own mother with such calculated gentility and ceaseless humanizing. That manner of approach is emblematic to Ray's trauma and conditioning within their dynamic. But she is in Print's body. Wouldn't Ray at some point stop to think about how messed up it is that she's essentially following this dynamic as her girlfriend? That she must try and ask for respect, carefully at that, in Print's body, of the very person who harmed Print, who has harmed Print through her. Then you remember how the show has already handled, or not handled, conflict, how it goes about romanticizing Print's empathy and empathizing with Ray's lack of accountability. You pair that with the deep-rooted virtue of unchallenged respect for your parents, vested in Thai culture and thusly incorporated in Thai GL too, not to cast judgment on the fact, and you realize there is nothing but redemption imminent for everyone who could have any potential nuance in their storyline.
ฉันก็แค่อยากมาเยี่ยมบ้านแฟนลูกสาว
แฟนลูกสาว แม่เลิกแกล้งพินเถอะค่ะ กลัวหมดแล้วเนี่ย
เพิ่งรู้ว่าลูกสะใภ้ขี้กลัว นึกว่าจะเป็นคนแสบซ่ากว่านี้สิ
Did somebody say
Slave?
I understand the topic of cultural filial piety making things complicated and layered, and I also understand Print being on board with Ray as Print trying to bridge a connection with the mother, given Print's self-diminishing, empathetic nature. I can even understand the possible argument of the both of them having been in each other's bodies for such a substantial amount of time at this point, together and intimately too, that they happen to forget that they are not in their own body, and thus act out of habit. That latter argument is indeed somewhat valid, as the show makes a point to frame how, in their growing closer, they start to feel at home, not just with each other emotionally, but with each other, so themselves, physically too. That is part of the point of their romance, tangled into knowing and learning one another in otherworldly, perceptible ways that exceed real-life capabilities of grasping. Still, wouldn't Ray at least start thinking more about all of this effort to appease her own mother as Print after they've switched back? Or I don't know, when her mother eventually tries to blacklist Print? Especially after she and her mother finally end up on better terms in the end, and she officially introduces her mother to Print, providing the first chance at a proper conversation between them? Why is everything so forcibly peaceful? Why does Print's passivity feel like classist propaganda? How is Print so tall but she doesn't stand tall? Why are things so easily copacetic? Is this a dream? Am I under a spell myself? Is love not allowed to be about addressing conflict? Why are we ha-ha-haing when we haven't ha-ha had a proper conversation? The switch is used in other meaningful ways and forms to explore intimacy. Credit where credit is due. The intimacy of consent, a sadly famously unasked question in GL, finds an unostentatiously creative, gently rhapsodical portrayal here, one that left me a bit speechless. Ray and Print's first love scene revolves around guiding each other in touching themselves, essentially embracing the metaphor of consent both in and beyond the body, as well as sharing true self-love. Love and desire all require a knowledge of self to be conscientiously reciprocated, whether physically or otherwise. The focus on seeing one another not merely for their body nor beyond their body, but as part of your own body, while still holding gentle boundary for and with the other, mirrors a form of intimacy that most of us dream of reaching. The sheer comfort of someone guiding you into sensual pleasure because they have the knowledge of the body you inhabit, it being technically theirs, yet they naturally understand that it is still your body, and they do not assume nor expect you to, on your own, cross the platonic lines with a body you have not before touched this way, and neither have they yours. The safety and trust of sharing your physical agency with someone else's physique and being fully conscious and intentional and respectful in doing so. Yeah, if witnessing this love scene hadn't sparked deep feelings in me, it'd be terribly remiss of my heart and even soul. Nay, it must be said that on the part of communicating between the leads where physical intimacy is concerned, there is committedly clever, aforethought, and purpose directing, writing, and storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Now that's what I'm talking about.
As for Ray and Print's emotional intimacy, gently putting aside the topic of consciousness around positionality for a moment, it's wonderful to watch bloom. Their softness with one another is adorable, and I must applaud the entire production for putting such emphasis on their young love feeling like love and not just young. Though unconfirmed, it's likely they are each other's first real love, which explains too how both of them seem to struggle with communication. It's never easy, let alone the first time around. Still, the way they navigate falling for one another is filled with giddy glee and peaceful play. Ray wanting Print to just call her by her name because she's never heard it uttered by someone who comes as close as possible to loving her unconditionally is as beautiful as it is sad. Of course, following the show's tone, it is just beautiful. Print planning a 10-day anniversary, overwhelmed with the warmth of having someone who, in an emotional way, takes care of her and affirms her, feeling Ray sees her for who she is, not just what she gives. Again, beautiful, sad. There is spectrality here for those with eyes to see. But beyond the unspoken language of love, ironically, the body switch does prove that literally being in someone else's shoes is conversely not enough to deeply understand them if you do not reflect on your own footing in this world. Ray and Prince romance is all about mirrors, looking back, seeing yourself as you see the other. Yet, relatability alone does not define the ability of a relationship. Sometimes things don't look the same because they just aren't the same. Weighing with each other what you always wished for, what you never got, and what you never had can never balance the scales. It's not supposed to. That's not how life or love works. The threads of Ray and Prince's pain and struggle aren't parallel. Neither are the threads from wanting to giving, though the show would have you think otherwise. In their relationship, on the respective spectrum from envy to empathy, Ray and Prince start out mostly on the left, but end up separated as they grow closer. Their romance takes the hit for, ironically, not making it so equally down the line, ending up feeling loving, yes, yet a bit emotionally disinvested. While it makes sense the story takes its time to have Ray finally stand up to her mother, in all that time, she unabashedly asks compassion of Print. She asks, and Print willingly offers. Print tries to understand Ray because, in some deep way, she's always tried to understand Ray. She doesn't see Ray as evil, not really. In fact, she may have even been in love with her back then. The border between envy and intimacy, not much a border at all. As their relationship develops, she figures out not just that Ray has a deep need for a sense of agency, but what that means and why, and encourages her to go talk to her mother. Print, early on in the story, even sympathizes with Ray after finding out she lied about having also scratched Print's face on the diary photo. She hadn't because Ray was never actually angry with Print, which the show uses as a plot point through how it frames it to both face Print with a sense of guilt, for a very valid emotional response, mind you, as well as further develop her gradual feelings for Ray. But a question we fail to ask is, what right would Ray have had to be angry with Print to begin with? Ray should feel the guilt here. And she does feel guilty, definitely. We see her struggle with it internally. But when it comes down to talking through it, the dialogue leaves things mostly unspoken. And when, after her mother tries to ruin Print's career again, Ray eventually does question why Print is so understanding, whether she shouldn't be upset or at least frustrated instead, Print fervently defends Ray's mother, not just because that is, again, her characterization, but because the plot requires her to.
พินไม่โกรธคุณแม่เลยเหรอ
ไม่โกรธหรอก เลยลองคิดดูนะ ว่าถ้ามีใครมาทำให้ลูกสาวตัวเองทิ้งอนาคต แล้วก็ไม่ยอมไปต่างประเทศ ก็ทิ้งความฝันไปเลย เป็นเรานะ ก็คงไม่ชอบคนคนนั้นเหมือนกันนั่นแหละ
I'm confused.
As is the norm with dramas, you can derive a lot of a show's core politics from how it portrays, writes, and develops the survivor, the underdog, the character that structurally suffers at the hand of others. Print is, well, the true blueprint for the show's mapping of its identity. However, her empathy goes at the cost of her growth. She is ever forgiving of others, and so is the show, making it feel almost as if the harm presented on screen really isn't that big of a deal, or that impactful. Since the show carries a hopeful tone, so does she. Since she doesn't have a strong voice of assertion, neither does the show. Her characterization and storyline trickle down to a romanticization of the form of middle-class struggle presented here. Prince's personality stands at the forefront, decidedly defining the central theme: connection through forced relatability. The show banks on Ray and Prince's conflict resolution having an emotional payoff without Print getting paid, so to speak. For if she were to demand justice for herself, the story would have to take into account, well, true accountability. The result remains redemption without restitution.
Oh my God, I don't have any money. What happened to the money?
On the topic of the cost of redemption, it seems it's finally time then to address the elephant in the room, Ray's mother. In the spirit of being fair, I attest that Ray's character development is also diminished and arguably even somewhat dismissed. Though she's caused Print pain, she does herself suffer consequences of her mother's corruption, at least somewhat. Beyond this, her mother is emotionally abusive, exercising control over Ray as a means to project her own fears and unfulfilled goals. While she does love her daughter, she has not loved her daughter, molding her in her image and shattering Ray's sense of confidence, self, and agency in the process. So much so that Ray takes carrying out her mother's abandoned dreams upon herself, with a sense of honor, a sense of grace, a sense of pride almost. Since we are in a thaigl, and one clearly rooted in some semblance of fantasy at that, naturally, her mother is wholly redeemed, as is unfortunately still the norm with abusive family plotlines. Though we don't get there in a completely standardized way. Ray does confront her mother. It deserves to be said that Ray finally asserting herself is crucial storytelling, and had we followed through on it in a more grounded, meaningful way, it would have been a turning point for how thaigl can even go about parent-child conflict. Alas, here too, the impact remains short-lived. While she went to her mother more with the goal in mind of saying no to her mother's set-up job meeting than the asking of accountability for Print, her finally taking a stance is admirable. Judging by Print asking Ray if she's there for herself or on her behalf, it seems plausible Print would not have wanted Ray to stand up to her mother for Print, if that wasn't clear from her character thus far already. Anyway, the threat her mother makes of disowning her marks a shift in Ray's values. She symbolically hands in her car keys, signifying her dignity and agency cannot be bought any longer. And depending on how you look at it, her comment
เล่ฝากคืนคุณพ่อด้วยค่ะ
could even be a jab at her mother, insinuating all their wealth down to the car, at the end of the day, all belongs to her father, not her. Which is exactly the motivation behind her mother being so controlling in the first place, as she is herself dependent on a loveless man in a loveless marriage, and wants her daughter to have financial safety she herself doesn't.
It's getting weird. But I still need to get this
car. Beep, beep, beep.
bitches is
So, what happens next? Ray is fully set on her decision, but she doesn't want to break off contact with her mother. It was a fight, not a farewell. Ray tells Print she's decided to be a director, and once her mother sees how successful she's become, she'll have no choice to accept it. And really, her. The foreshadowing of how, even now, Ray still seeks her mother's approval deep down, and it prevents reflecting on all the harm her mother caused coming back up. As a child whose parent has lived through them their whole life, Ray feels responsible for her mother's happiness. Since I am also personally familiar with the subject, I can attest to the fact this is by all means not a good nor healthy thing, not even in a disembodied, poeticized way. We are not put on this earth to resolve our parents' internalized issues, or their unsatisfactory sense of self. Any marvel or soul tie we may ourselves claim this kind of relationship to have is, unfortunately, always attached to us reaffirming our own conditioning. In other words, coping. In our taught devotion and loyalty to our parents, we may bind our sense of identity to that of theirs in a way that only serves one of the two, and I can guarantee you it is rarely the child. Ray and her mom are both hopeful the other will understand them, but there are power structures here that cannot be compared nor relinquished with simple apology. Ray's mother should acknowledge the damage she has caused, altering Ray's entire trajectory of life at her mercy, under the guise of protecting her child's future. She is herself a victim of an abusive marriage, and that deserves to be recognized, but it does not undo nor excuse her abuse. Conversations that center justice are not about excuse. They are about restorative practice, applied intersectionality, and communal processing and boundary defining. It would seem, in how the series unravels itself, that it is not interested in any of that. While again, I understand filial piety is a cultural issue, and I do not claim to have the position nor appropriate cultural context as an outsider to criticize it inside out, in a general sense, I personally do not think the repeated message of a parent or family member being easily or always forgiven for abuse and or violence, whether emotional or physical, creates any dialogue around family hierarchy and dynamics that's worth pragmatically engaging with. To me, and I am saying this whilst acknowledging my take is in part from a Western lens as well, this constant redemption without cause or real consequence is harmful rhetoric to uphold. In queer stories at that, where we, its audiences, are already often so first-hand familiar with the structures of domestic and familial abuse in our own lives. Queer audiences deserve stories about queer community, and a family should, in an ideal world just like the one Queendom tries to represent, be a part of that on terms of true mutual care, love, and accountability. But I digress. Queendom alone cannot be faulted for the legacy of a trope that long precedes it, though its adding to said legacy is an exasperating letdown. Advertently, when Ray's mom ruins Prince's career again, simultaneously using her as a means to exercise control over Ray once more, the writing has to come up with ways to shift blame or responsibility onto, well, no one really. Trauma, I suppose, and that of the mother at that. Right intention, wrong execution, that type of tale. After Ray's acceptance speech, we do not see them have any conversation about it. Side note, I have come to understand it is likely Ray's speech was in part written for Arhung, who had sadly lost her mother around the time of the show's casting. I want to make a note of it to say that I understand its emotional worth for the actress, yet I will continue to engage with it as an element of the writing and subsequent story without its real-life counterpart meaning or intention, for the sake of proper story analysis. I will say, impact on the story aside, I cannot imagine how hard it must have been to film that, and I want to warmly compliment Arhung for pouring her heart into it as she did. Ray visits Print, surprising her by bringing her mother along, and Print is visibly rattled by this, which the mother makes a joke about. Then she recognizes their relationship, says, "I apologize for everything in the past," and that's it. The woman who spearheaded the very conflict to kickstart Ray and Print's complicated history, truly the one at fault for causing Print pinnacles of harm she suffered in both her teenage and adult life, and traumatized Ray inside out, is forgiven, fully, without depth or dialogue to swim in. Ray's mother is the true queen here. It is her queendom, and she shall be revered. Her redemption begets a happy ending. That is not necessarily a bad thing. We love a happy ending, but the manner in which she is granted said ending is both rushed and rootless. Ray is grateful for all she's given her, so we don't have to speak on all she's taken. Print is grateful for finally being accepted by her, so we don't have to talk about how she was treated as a mere object, an unfortunate tool in the maintained control over her daughter's life. Twice.
คุณแม่ คุณยัง
Keep it right here, because Freaky Friday will be right back.
And now, let's get back to Freaky Friday.
Everything, ultimately, with the exception of male-based violence, thankfully, is conveniently redeemable in this world. And while one can argue on the queer theory of that, I think it's vital, especially pertaining to queer media, to acknowledge women, and queer characters are not exempt from participating in systemic violence, and can reinforce harm steeped in aspects of the very oppression they too suffer under. Quote-unquote feminist material deserves better than the excusing or sweeping under a rug of the harm a woman caused other women, just because she herself is a woman or a mother who has experienced harm. That isn't true feminism. That isn't adhering to classist, even ageist hierarchy disguised as liberational praxis. Considering the story's reoccurring harm in question is capitalist and elitist in nature, and the oppressive structures at hand are barely dissected, rather emotionally manipulatively reframed through the redeeming of Ray's mother and her behavior, without proper course of action or discourse, Queendom's politics appear to have more in common with liberalism, perhaps even Western liberalism, on the part of the optics of feminism being more important than the implementation. Granted, though Ray's mother's arc is an issue, the inclusion of older women and parental figures at that, as continuously important to the story and in dialogue with the younger ones, is very feminist. Even though Ray's mother is technically the titular villain of the story, she isn't merely treated as one. On the other hand, we unfortunately do not explore the nuance and complexity of her personality or plotline's applied consequence, as it involves Ray and Print, which does make the representation ring a bit hollow. But at least there is no iteration of scarred older women being framed as inherently evil or decidedly unworthy of humanization. That is a most welcome approach in this misogynist world that still can't seem to conjure up any better or even creative quote-unquote bad guy figure for its media, horror and romance alike, other than a bitter old lady. The way Queendom goes about its variety of age is very valuable. Modern day society, quite universally, capitalizes on the concept of life ending somewhere after your early 20s. It is very refreshing to see some spectrality of womanhood in that regard. Print and Ray chaotically navigating the best ways to communication and struggling to assert themselves with each other as well as the older people in their life is perfectly logical, since really, in a way, life starts somewhere in your early 20s. And judging by Mai's and Fon's escapades, it certainly continues. Yes, Queendom makes a purposefully realistic point of connection being hard no matter your age. So this is the part where I pretend to have a clever segue into Mai and Fon's romance. We still don't know, by the end of it all, what exactly happened between Mai and Fon. But whatever it was, Fon clearly also chose the path of forgiveness. And it is debatable whether that wasn't also at the cost of some of her boundary or claim to justice. When it comes to Mai and Fon's romance, things are inherently complicated. We can really only speculate as to precisely what happened after the kiss, on what grounds Fon got fired, and whether Mai was directly responsible, though I assume so, since she was apparently her boss. What we can derive from this reserved amount of context is that it's hard to decide exactly how much to root for Mai to get the girl, or for Fon to maybe have deserved better. Like an explanation to start, the fact of the matter is that while a drunk Fon kissed Mai, Mai willingly kissed her back, fully sober. There are several factors here that mark this unofficial commencement of their road to romance a concern, and fitting chapter in the ongoing subject of missing reparations. For one, Mai was not drunk. For two, Fon was. For three, Mai was her boss. For four, Fon, off-screen, got fired sometime after, presumably by Mai. I don't know about you, but I feel like calling HR.
ฝนเคยคิดนะ ว่าถ้าเกิดวันนั้นฝนไม่จูบพี่เรื่องของเราจะเป็นยังไงต่อ แบบไหนก็ได้อะที่ไม่ใช่จบที่ฝนถูกไล่ออก
Call HR.
We need to call
HR.
No matter what happened after that, and even with acknowledging Fon should not have kissed her boss, or at work either, the circumstances do paint a bad picture on Mai's behalf. Like I mentioned, Fon wasn't fully lucid, clearly less inhibited, and aware of her surroundings and the social code. Mai was completely aware, and even after processing it for a moment, still decided to kiss her back, expressing interest and consent. Consent that, mind you, Fon cannot even fully give herself since she is inebriated. Knowing this, I think it's safe to say there was not only a power imbalance at play here, but one that exercised control over Fon by virtue of losing her job. It might have been a different story if Mai hadn't kissed her back, had cut her off immediately or such, not to excuse the fact that Fon's kiss could have just as easily been experienced as harassment. But in this scenario where one person is drunk and the other is not, it is also on the sober person, assuming the drunk person is not harming them of course, to take responsibility in keeping the other safe when it comes to intimacy, by not engaging in intimacy with them, as they are unable to fully consent no matter what they may express in the moment. Mai and Fon are both grown, they know that. Yes, Fon probably would have gotten a disciplinary hearing or something, I don't know. I do of course understand the validity of firing someone on grounds of erratic, unwanted behavior, sexual advances at that, context to context, and always with believing the survivor in mind. But does any of that apply here? While I do think this situation is messy all around, I cannot help but side with Fon, and I'll give you another reason why. After kissing her for some time, Mai suddenly pulls back and says this.
พี่ว่าฝนเมามากแล้วกลับบ้านไปเถอะ
After indulging her own desire, Mai suddenly catches herself and, for whatever reason, indirectly excuses her behavior on Fon being drunk. She says this not because she is worried about Fon in that moment, or because she feels overpowered by or unsafe with Fon. She says this because she is shocked at her own decisive reciprocation and deflects. So not only did she kiss Fon back, she blamed her returning the kiss on Fon's initiation. In this situation, Mai was clearly not under any sense of force or coercion. The only point of concern to be made in her regard is that it is unclear whether she wanted Fon to kiss her in the first place. I suppose with what we see play out, we can say it is indeed vague whether she wanted Fon to kiss her, but it is evident that she wanted to kiss Fon back.
P ว่าฝนเมามากแล้ว
Call HR.
We need to call
HR.
The optics of it all look bad. Though definitely aware of what happened to her not being right, Fon still spends an undisclosed number of years after secretly pining for Mai, often recalling that kiss, that moment, wondering to herself what would have happened had things gone differently. Mai likely buried it, being someone deeply afraid of commitment and expressing, maybe even experiencing, vulnerability. Upon meeting again, not much of that seems to have changed. You start to feel bad for Fon, who is clearly in love with someone particularly cold and standoffish towards her. However, Mai's inner world is truly that, something we do not get to see. She loves Fon too, though for how long or since when or what the timeline is there remains up to imaginative interpretation. After building up so much tension and carrying so much unresolved emotion for so long, the mutually communicative turning point is Mai and Fon sleeping together. Shortly before this physical reunion, Fon wakes up scared and distraught in an unrecognized bed, the recognizable implications of which made my heart sink. Mai walks out of the bathroom and comments on Fon always passing out when drunk. Fon, who has since sobered up, responds with this.
ใครจะเมาแล้วจูบเด็กเก่งแบบพี่วะ
Call the police. We need to call the police.
After some more back and forth, where Fon is being passive-aggressive as a shield to pretend she isn't hurt, hasn't been hurt for quite some time, Mai finally professes her love for Fon by, well, physical means and indirect phrasing. Consent here is in place like it never was before for them, likely not just to close the wound of that memory, but I suspect as a means of the narrative itself to resolve the issue altogether. This is the directly connected reparation Fon gets, consensual intimacy where Mai reaffirms her interest in her and it. In other words, Fon does not get proper accountability for Mai's actions towards her or the impact they had on her. It's remarkable how both of Queendom's main romantic storylines manage to superficially resolve the initial conflict of a weaponized power imbalance within a relationship with the sheer act of just being in said relationship. The idea that choosing to be with someone is conversation enough. Yes, Fon should have taken accountability for kissing Mai while drunk, as soon as she was in a state to do so, if it was evident the kiss was not consensual for Mai, which arguably isn't evident. This stands aside the sober truth Fon herself never got any proper apology, sympathy, or considered praxis of accountability from Mai for being fired after kissing her. The dotted line of someone using their positional power to exercise control over someone else as well as their livelihood comes up again. While the motive, method, and context are certainly not the same as that in Print and Ray's storyline, the outcome is not dissimilar. Fon experienced capitalist harm at the hands of Mai. Mai used her position as her boss, weaponizing the perceivable complexity of the situation itself, not to fire a drunk employee who harassed her, but a drunk employee who kissed her and she kissed back and then regretted kissing.
This is for
HR.
you big, fat, white, nasty, smelling.
They progressively stumble and stride through learning how to talk to one another and prioritize the other, and it is joyfully endearing and frustrating to witness. Fon is empathetic, yet indirect. Mai is practical, yet inexpressive. Mai doesn't bring up the past, Fon doesn't ask. The writing settles on apology without words. While their history is treated as many things along the way, a starting point to their romantic relationship, a rehashed memory after their sleeping together, and a baseline display of both Mai and Fon's patterns of behavior, the work incident in its resolution entails and explores no messaging of justice-based discourse. Even the self-titled adults in the show pass on processing the past. Not unrealistic, definitely not unrealistic, but aggravating, considering the show's general lack of care for portraying at least mostly healthy, practical, and warm ways of owning up to harm. I'm sure you, or if applicable your ovaries, may have noticed, where their physical intimacy is concerned, Mai and Fon like to engage in a fair bit of roleplay, or at least the performance of control. Also, Fon generally seems to have the upper hand in arguments, with Mai bending to her will and apologizing profusely in the process. Maybe this is a stretched interpretation, but bear with me this exercise of analysis. I cannot help but wonder if all this is meant to mirror, there we go again, Mai's early on abuse of power towards Fon, in the idea that, while harm occurred, Fon is truly the one calling the shots in this relationship, to phrase it crudely, and that this is a subliminal invocation by the show of there having been perceivable balance in the relationship all along. Sure, Fon got fired by Mai, but look at her now. She's anxious to make Fon happy and equally anxious when Fon is unhappy. Fon got fired, but Mai had it hard too, clearly struggling deeply with her feelings. The show tries to induce the sentiment that there never was any true imbalance. Or perhaps the case is that the circumstances of what happened made Fon this way, hardened, a bit more blunt, more strict, with Mai specifically. If that is the angle the show is going for, then that's a whole different can of worms, because that speaks to the literal personality change of a character due to another character's influence on their life. We barely sit with that, or merely in passing allude to how both of them have come to perceive each other, now that they're actually getting to know one another. The depth in discussing their past is missing. Instead, they seem to settle on their lack of communication. Verbal communication, that is. Certainly, there is no one way for love to look healthy, but playing with that complexity and simply abandoning it altogether are two different things. Ray's mother's deeds evoke no redeeming, but she gets it anyway. Ray takes little accountability, but receives it anyway. Even Mai gives no reparations, but receives, well, grace anyway. While Ray is appointed to forgive her parent by writing bound in cultural norm and therefore complex in its dissection, Print and Fon are the ones appointed to embody the main theme itself, to forgive your partner regardless of justice enacted. Both Mai Fon and Ray Prince's relationship alike cannot exist without the harmed forgiving the harmer, and do not exist without their traumas being compared and evened out in favor of absent accountability. While the duality of life is not black and white or pink and beige, the fact that in the case of both relationships there is a clear accepted lack of taking responsibility, reframed as empathizing with one another due to an impossible idea of equivalence in struggle, is telling. These love stories imply the existence of predetermined connections, but even the promise of prophecy requires being present and intentional with one another in your words and actions. Redemption without restoration, reflection, or responsibility isn't truly queer futurism. At best, it mirrors the baseline present-day, uninformed approach of dealing with harm and accountability in queer community, since so many of us, myself included, do not ourselves know how to truly call one another in, or context to context, practice principles of justice beyond ramification or isolation.
เนี่ยนะกิจกรรมสนุกๆของพี่อะ
แล้วฝนคิดว่าพี่ชวนมาทำอะไรอะ
Like, where did that come from?
Just out of the blue.
Out of the blue.
There is something so unequivocally lost in a story about switching bodies that still amounts to comparing traumas. But sadly, Queendom manages to do just that. For how do you preach equity when you try to balance literal screen time on both characters, as well as their story and growth, even though one is the survivor of the other's antics, which itself is the very base of the story? How do you explore present classism, elitism, patriarchal violence, etc., if no main character can be left as poignantly morally flawed? The answer is, well, you don't. Not really. Using your world building to try and keep a surface level, even optimistic tone in darker social topics for the priority of romanticizing itself and the overall development of the story and its characters makes for little, if any, room to engage critically with said topics. Furthermore, it trivializes their weight. And that is exactly why I cannot help but be disappointed in how this story unravels. Because I care about this show. I care about how hard it tries to distance from the standard toxic and harmful tropes and stereotypes we've become so familiarized with. I care about how it even succeeds in this, to a great extent. Queendom does a lot of things right, and intentionally so. It moves away from much of the slog of problematic growing pains thaigl are still suffering from. I care about the intent in framing a story that intertwines queerness and feminism, and queer feminism at that, and portrays a, to many relatable, tale of envy, intimacy, and its interconnection, and how it all fuses under the guide of coming of age and navigating young adulthood. I care about a show that wants to show queer love, not just in its 20s, but in its 30s, and without casting judgmental or ageist tone on either relationship, paint the contrasts there, both in challenges as well as victories. I care about Queendom, but ultimately, in not establishing a clear voice on its own supposed points about privilege and harm, that is its voice. It sides with the ruling body, the wealthy, the upper class, those in power over others. I care about Queendom, but the Queendom does not fully care about me, or us, the commoners, queer folks who IRL face institutional harm on the daily, and even at the hands of other, more privileged queer folks by proxy of them upholding these institutions. The Queendom does not care, not even those with the power at hand, whether print or phone for that matter, get their fair, emphasis on fair, share, their serving of justice, and, in the very end, till the very end, lets them eat cake. Sure, print does achieve her goals, becoming successful, famous, and a household name, with a household of her own to boot. Her home is finally finished, and judging by the size of it, we can only imagine how hard she must have worked to afford it, and she gifts it to Ray and her, for them to start their domestic life together once and for all. She got what she so long coveted, and got there entirely by her own merit, even with a partner who was already there, and really owed her something tangible to aid her journey. Wait, well, okay. Let me backtrack to the finale for a moment. I suppose there is one thing that Ray helps her establish her dreams with, one true form of reparation to contrast stealing her dreams all those years ago. Ray tells Print about an acting job in South Korea. She'd heard about it from Nicha, her previous co-star on a different project, coincidentally the very same woman Ray's father had been cheating on her mother with.
พี่ไม่แปลกใจเลยจริงๆที่ขึ้นมาเป็นตัวท็อปตั้งแต่อายุยังน้อย
ต้องขอบคุณพี่นิชามากกว่าค่ะที่ส่งอารมณ์มาดี จนเรย์แอบคิดว่าพี่นิชาเป็นแม่จริงๆไปแล้ว
Which unsurprisingly means that, being ever so steadfast in her boundless empathy, Print ends up turning it down. Because, in her explanation to Ray,
ก็โปรเจกต์เนี้ยพี่นิชาเป็นคนแนะนำมา พินก็ไม่ได้อยากจะรับงานจากคนที่มาทำร้ายครอบครัวเลยหรอกนะ
it is notable that even now, Print practices her morality of loyally supporting others, even if it costs her a livelihood-defining opportunity. In this case, a real shot at returning to her acting career. This far into the story, Ray has come to realize Print cares for others so much she can forget herself. Back in episode 10, whilst paying respects to Print's father, Ray mused about Print's empathy out loud, possibly for the first time. It's a beautiful moment, embedded in smiled grief and shared spiritualism. However, its catharsis, temporary, considering we reverse this progress with Ray's mother's redemption arc, etc. Nevertheless, this previous dialogue at least built up Ray taking Print's lack of self-care more seriously. And here, we see that continuation. Ray is visibly concerned and tries to discuss Print's decision in complete favor of Print. Sadly, Print had already declined the offer before telling Ray. So while Ray's attempt at convincing her to go for it, without yet knowing Print has declined, is both a perfectly empathetic response and a short yet clear testament to Ray's growing awareness, it remains unaccomplished in effecting any possible change, an unfulfilled, unfulfillable reparation, in the spirit of the show's mentality, which, to be reasonable, this time is not on Ray. In how Ray goes about encouraging Print to not pass up the gig so hastily, she remarks something very important. something that aptly solidifies the point I've been trying to make about the show's own voice on the matter.
แต่โอกาสเนี้ยมันสำคัญกับพินมากเลยนะ ที่จะได้รับงานแสดงอีกอีกอย่างโปรเจกต์นี้มาจากใครมันไม่สำคัญเท่าพินได้มันมาเพราะความสามารถของตัวเองไม่ใช่หรอ
This is it then, the ultimate statement, through a fitting use of raised dialogue that proves the story's characterization of Print does not and cannot allow for a different interpretation or approach of justice-based relationships, at least where her own relationship is concerned. Going by the implication of Ray's observation, it is highly likely that Print herself would not have even accepted any reparations from Ray, should Ray have tried to manifest them with and for her. Miraculously, conveniently, thankfully, Print gets a call for another project offered to her by a different South Korean agency in that same conversation, and she does decide to take that one, which proves to be a great success, landing her international fame and a multi-year extension on her contract. The show makes its final, subtle testament to Ray's growth by having her be the one making the sacrifice, in Print going abroad for her career. Then again, losing Glitter Girl was never a sacrifice from Print, but I digress. Perchance the closing argument is that Ray's waiting for Print is her way to fully redeem herself, subconsciously at least. If so, I would argue accountability isn't about compromising on what the other can give you, in this case presence and companionship. It's about giving the other something that doesn't focus on what they are giving or not giving you in return. With their parting, Ray's arc is pretty much wrapped up. We're left to summarize Print's path. So then, how exactly does the show frame her journey? She goes from experiencing life-altering loss to coming back with everything she ever dreamt of. To be clear, I am obviously glad she does. Ending up in the life she should have gotten a chance to start from the beginning is the least she deserves. Still, her life struggles, hard work, pressure discipline, and pressure of discipline, the entire narrative seems to minimize it, not necessarily only in how much it displays it, but in how it does so, when it does. The issue here is not that Print as a person wants to achieve goals with her own acquired resources, or not rely on others where a means to income is concerned, or not expect to be given opportunity without quote-unquote earning it. While this speaks to her survivalism, this all makes sense for her character, it makes sense for her lived world, and it makes sense for her development. The issue isn't Print, the issue is how, with an exceptionally fourth-wall-breaking irony, the script uses Print.
Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. And right now, you can save £50 per person. That's £200 off for a family of 4.
The final affirmation of Print declining needed and wanted work out of a sense of loyalty to her loved ones who have yet to take proper accountability towards her for their part in the established circumstances of her needing said work in the first place, as well as the way she, and arguably Fon too, goes about forgiveness and empathy overall, is, much like the show's entire approach to equity, conflictingly both harmful and oddly spiritual. Harmful because it can teach or even internalize for applicably impressionable viewers that your boundaries and desires, whether they be emotional or material, aren't a cohesive pair. That if the request is to prioritize someone else's emotions over your own needs or equate their pain to yours, you committedly should do so, if it means safeguarding their feelings, even if it means diminishing yours. Because that's what love is, and because it'll all just work out in the end anyway. That prioritizing someone else's comfort is an unwritten rule. That instead of searching for compromise, you jump straight into surrender. And I do say surrender, as in trying to give your power away, convinced you have no other choice to make in the matter, you ask the other person validation for the figurative relinquishing of your agency. And spiritual because, well, it feels like the universe at last rewards Print for her choices, having her gain better and bigger opportunities in the end. Perhaps from a higher power or out of a cosmic sense of balance or endearment, or maybe the pull of energy that has finally manifested its abundance in reaction to all the energy Print willingly, tirelessly exuded and shared with her ether, with her world, with the world. I suppose the show aims for the latter outcome, feel-wise. It professes a need for a certain kind of patience, acceptance, and faith. patience for what is coming to you, acceptance of what you have lost, and faith in what was always yours. Love is the final promise to suffered hardship, but the past lingers. Queendom inhabits a world that seemingly has no grounded threat that can't be fixed or done away with through either sheer convenience of plot or convenience of characterization, which proves to be rather shallow where a level of considered conscious commentary is concerned, even on, for example, direct physical gender-based violence. The stalker side plot is of a far greater impact than implied. The possible trauma Ray and Print would logically have suffered from it alone is worthy of a storyline, not to mention the brutal sobriety of the fact that chances are this situation could have very easily gone very different for them. I'm glad they get out mostly physically unscathed, of course, but why don't we stay with how it made them feel, if only for a moment? It's so odd, it feels surreal and not in a good way. The topic of misogynist violence, of a predatory stalker at that, something so many women and queer women face, famous or not, here is treated like a cartoon. Relevant to the realm of just that one episode, and then it's over, reaffirming what the show is trying to tell us, regardless of the harm all around in the grand scheme of things, to not focus too much on the memory. Bad things happen, but love conquers all, even that which was conquered without love.
I am under the water. Please help me.
Miss Keisha. Miss Keisha. Miss Keisha. Oh my fucking god, she fucking dead.
Don't get me wrong, the love Ray and Print or Mai and Fon have is certainly not without depth or heart. They do love one another, and it could be argued, at least on Ray Print's romance, that it was always destined to be so. Ray's very opening scene alludes to this, as she, in meditation, has a vision of a pink world, at the center, Print's figure. Perhaps a premonition, perhaps a passage from her conscious, though the irony of us only seeing Print being Ray's fate, not vice versa, despite all, is not lost on me. I wish, in recognizing the incorporation of mysticism, that these themes of fate, destiny, and predetermined outcomes were still discussed more intentionally, because while enthralling and enchanting, queer love, to me, deserves more depth than a normalization of lacking accountability, or comparing trauma in favor of soulmatism. Your soulmate should know how to apologize, surely. They not be your soulmate otherwise, right? If words do not suffice, actions certainly will. Fantasy does not need to be bereft of struggle, but there is nothing imaginative about displaying conflict without proper resolution. In a queer romance, where the purpose of the story is, in large part, to romanticize. What is a dream world if nightmares still happen, yet we do not speak of them?
And
Love is itself a spell, an incantation breathing promises, compromise, and desire. The ritual of trying to find them even when you cannot seem to reach yourself. Sometimes we think we truly understand someone when we've remembered the way their skin folds, familiarized the sound of their sighs, seen the time passing in their eyes. We witness how they move through life, and we preach how similar that dance is. It feels good to relate. Speech can manifest mountains and molehills alike, but climbing to conclusions is no good if you start on the wrong foot. It's part of the magic, certainly. Curiously though, in learning how to hold someone else, we can forget ourselves. It's easy to get lost, and even easier to stay lost. There are no rules to healing. Feeling detached from your vessel is common, and commonalities can feel comforting. You cannot be blamed for the things you do not yet comprehend. Occasionally, things really do need to happen for you to feel them come up. We carry eons of genetic data, and then ourselves too. Learning how to include yourself in your charms takes practice, takes patience, takes time, and grace. But magic usually doesn't pay the bills, nor dry your tears. If you truly want better for yourself, you'll have to crawl out of your throat and hang off every word that leaves your lips, finding that the sound of your voice, as it makes points of streams and questions from assumptions, is indeed beautiful. Forgiveness is beautiful. And it starts with you, forgiving yourself for all you could not say back then, would not, and all you put yourself through just to get through. Forgiving yourself for all those damn years wasted. Perhaps not wasted, spent. Yeah, forgiveness isn't a single conversation, though at times it can feel like a moment's notice, a switch suddenly washing over and rushing into you, making you feel more at ease again, at home in the room between your arms. But that moment, too, takes time. It always does. You deserve it. You always do. When someone you love and care for harms you, it's never easy to know where to pick back up or how to begin. And why is thinking of how to begin even on you if you are the survivor in this story? Shouldn't it be a joint effort to counter the selfish ease with which they caused your reality? No matter where the words lie waiting, the truth that always prevails is you should never be made to forgive or make yourself feel like you have to, simply because that's what is expected of you, and that's what is necessary to move on. On to what? Things come up. You know, muscle memory, regular memory, and all. Actually, it's a good thing they come up. Staying stuck in shadowed crevices of your past but claiming you can see the morning sun break through is playing pretend. Pretty as your performance may be, no one but the class is watching, and you were meant for more than accepting the frown you see staring back.
ขอบคุณนะเลตลอดเวลาที่เลอยู่ในร่างพินอะเลเป็นพินที่ดีจริงด้วย
Therapy works, y'all. I'm telling you, seek it.
Love without observation is not always enough. Even if they, the other person, do get that, it's not only about acknowledging harm, but finding ways to actually take accountability. Empathy is feeling, but a choice to act on, and so is boundary. Depleting either to pursue peace is not only a great disservice to yourself, but also to all you've held together all these years, all you've built into a body, all you've shaped and sung and swung into a spirit, unwavering but always fragile. Should love feel like such a strenuous job, a 9 to 5 with no pension, loss without cause? Is intimacy a competition? Does it make you happy? Love is not a trade-off. Your heart knows it, does not buy into the transactional ways this world wants you to feel emotion. Although there's no shame in receiving material returns for things that never can be cosmically returned.
It's getting weird. But I still need to get this
car. B.
Justice can look like many things. Real, trying love tries to find what it should look like best. Understanding even when you don't. Seeing what you've done even if you'd rather not. Being afraid of consequence, perhaps, sure, but never letting fear be the consequence. Real love comes to pairing without comparison. There is so much in this life we cannot control. So I say to you, dear listener, I hope you feel safe around those you love anyway. I hope they hold themselves responsible for loving you, even when it causes harm. I hope you take what you give them seriously, and I hope they have something to give in return. Your intersectionality marks not just how much you had to survive, but what claim you have to better. You deserve true community that understands what it takes to hold your space, time, and energy. People that ask, no matter where you were, are, or may end up, I hope you feel and know that you deserve equitable love. Love that has so much more to say than sorry, provided it says even that. Your waters and walls alike make up the fortress that you are. Royalty, but not the bloodless, brutal, burglaring kind. No stepping on others, no stealing their voice. Regal in terms of air, in terms of poise, greeting nature and nature greeting back. You are a part of this world. That is what separates you from those who try to tear it open or skim the fat off the sides, making off with the fruit of labor they never tasted. I hope you return to people who treat you right the second time around, should you choose to return. That choice, at least, is always yours. May you always remember, your past defines your growing up, but defining your past is what helps you grow on. Your body is yours. Your time is yours. Your life is yours. No matter what they try to take, they can never take you. So let them love you if they have what it takes to. Hold your head high, dearest. You've come so far. You rule. Oh, you're still here. Oh my goodness, what a journey this was. Thank you so much for watching. I honestly had never intended to make this video this long. Started out with about 5,000 words, ended up with about 17,000. I'm not sure what happened, but I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you, Sooners, new viewers, all of you, especially those who've been around for a while, for also being so patient and so understanding. I've had a harder couple of weeks in terms of mental health, but I also tried to, in that time that I've been away, still work on this video, and it turned out to be way more work than I thought, as I think is evident. But it was wonderful to do. I honestly, truly, really enjoyed making this video, and I really hope that it was at least somewhat enjoyable to watch. Yeah, I learned a valuable lesson, which is that deep dives like this realistically cannot happen under a month, considering I'm the only one doing all the work, writing, editing, everything, obviously. On that note, I really want to say a special thanks to some of my friends and mutuals, D, J, K. Y'all know who you are. I'm so grateful for your support and your motivation. It genuinely meant a lot to me. And not just motivation, honestly, but even creative support. Because goodness knows there were many a times I wanted to bang my head against the wall working on this video. And, you know, it's such a solitary process, right? Writing and editing and all of that. But to have folks that I could message for advice or for insight, or who could just offer me some words of motivation, yeah, meant the world to me. And also, side note, for anyone who's not familiar with K, please go check out their Twitter. They have a fantastic thread on Queendom as well. It's really worth a read. Yeah, I think that's it for now. I know it's very unlikely a lot of people will be listening this far into the video, but for those of you that are still here, thank you. I love you. I'm so grateful for all of you. And I really hope you're doing well. I hope you're staying safe. Lastly, I've just opened up memberships. If you feel like it, absolutely no pressure, obviously, but if you feel like it, you can sign up. There's 2 tiers. I try to keep it at the lowest prices possible, and you get early access to videos, and at the second tier, you get your name credited in at the end of videos, just like the credits you see here, although a little nicer looking. This was just kind of a joke credit roll. And you get some emojis and things like that. But it's basically also a means of supporting me monetarily. That is, obviously, you know, your presence here already is support to me, obviously. But yeah, if you feel like it, if you have the coin to spare, obviously, you know, check that out. Yeah, I'll see y'all in 2 weeks. I love y'all. Stay safe. And don't forget to love yourself.